Hello, and welcome to the Mathematics of Tournament Poker video series. I'm Murby. I'll be the video voice, the voice behind the video. There we go. And since this is my first video in this series, I thought I would start by just giving a quick overview of who I am. So I have a PhD in mathematics. I got it a couple years ago, and I teach mathematics at a local university for a living. Of course, I am also heavily involved in poker. I've played poker since 2004, and yes, that does mean I am a product of the moneymaker era. I watched him on TV and thought, hey, that's cool, I can do that. In fact, it was my New Year's resolution in 2004 that I'm going to learn poker. And well, unlike all other New Year's resolutions out there, this one was the most successful. I still play poker to this day. That said, I have stuck with my initial passion of teaching mathematics, and this is my chance to combine the two and really show people a more mathematical approach to poker. A lot of people have already done this analysis. I'm just trying to make it accessible to those poker players who aren't yet comfortable with doing this sort of mathematical analysis. So on to this series. It's going to be a four-part series. This first video will be on the role of mathematics in poker. We'll be talking a lot about the decision-making process, how mathematics will help us, and really setting the stage for the mindset or the approach to breaking down the analysis of different situations that arise. And that really sets the stage for the calculations that will follow in the remaining three videos. Video 2 will be probability and expected value calculations. These are things that are incredibly useful in cash games. Most people, if you've come from a cash games background and are trying to transition to tournaments, you'll probably be familiar with all this material in this second video. It is useful to review, and I'm also including it here because these first two videos really set the stage for why and how we go about calculating these ICM calculations. Why and how we go about formulating the ICM calculations. Once you've actually got these two videos under your belt, it's really a very logical and natural process to extend it to the ICM calculations in videos 3 and 4. So video 3 will be where we actually derive the calculations, figure out why they're necessary, and show how we would go about computing them. And in video 4, we're going to do a number of computations, and then finally into a discussion on how to do these end of session reviews that we'll talk about to help analyze your game. So anyway, we're on to the first video. So in this video, we'll be talking about the decision-making process in poker, so making decisions, the anatomy of a decision, and how that will lead to incorporating mathematics into your poker game. This happens both during a session and after a session. I mean, I suppose if you are a mathematical savant, you can do all these calculations during a session, but most people, myself included, can only do up to a certain level of complexity in the heat of the moment, and the more complex computations we would postpone to the end of our sessions. Okay, so let's start by a standard question that most people encounter on a regular basis at the poker table. I know I've been asked this question numerous times, or other variations of it. So are you a field player or are you a math player? And this is a common quote from many players at many times. And I'm not entirely keen on this perspective because most of the time when they're asking this question, it's the wrong point of view. So people are generally thinking, well, field players, they're ones who observe their opponents. They use tells and betting patterns to make their decisions. They pay attention to what's going on, and then they use this information to work out what they're going to do. Whereas the math players, people think, well, they compute their opponent's hand range, use some statistics, maybe some pot odds versus outs calculations, and maybe even some more complicated expected value calculations to determine what is the optimal play at every moment. And most people, when they're making these comparisons, they will identify with one of the other labels based on which one they feel is least like their own play style. So you'll hear someone say, oh, well, I know I'm a field player because I'm not comfortable doing the math in my head. But you know what? That's okay because I'm very attentive at the poker table and I keep track of people's betting patterns and stuff. Or conversely, I've heard some of my opponents say, well, I know all the odds. I know all the calculations. So I just play a very mathematical game. And the way they say it, and especially if you watch their style, they're really inattentive to what's going on. They keep track of some things, statistics of their opponents, poker tracker information basically, but really are oblivious to the other information available to them, betting patterns and tells, and the things that the field players seem to play up. And when you have one perspective or the other, you're missing out on the other perspective. That's okay, that's kind of a roundabout sentence. But basically the bottom line is if you look back at these two labels, I really shouldn't be saying field players and math players, but I really should be saying, well, there's two stages. The first stage is your observation stage, where you collect the information. And the second stage is the analysis stage. And generally speaking, in the analysis stage, you should be using some mathematics. Whereas generally speaking, in the observation stage, there isn't a whole lot of mathematics available to help you there. Now, there are some things that you can do mathematically in the observation stage, but it really, when we look at it, it'll be more along the lines of percentage of time that you make a play and statistics, basically. It's stuff that actually, in the heat of the moment, it's much better done by tracking software, or if you're at a table live, it really boils down to, do you have a good memory? Not, are you good at making some computations? Okay, so we have these two stages, this observation and analysis stage, that we want to incorporate into our game. So to do this, let's actually just look at poker itself. And, well, what is it? On its most basic level, it's just a bunch of decisions we're making. It's a game of decisions. And we're making at least one decision per hand. Are you going to fold or call or raise? And if you call or raise, that could lead to more decisions. Now, in an average tournament, you're playing a couple hundred hands or maybe several thousand hands. So you're making anywhere from a couple hundred decisions to a few thousand decisions. So if you want to improve your game, you really should work or look at optimizing your decision-making process. And the one real road bump in that, the one real challenge, is that this is also a game of incomplete information. Now that's completely unlike chess or checkers. In chess or checkers, you know where every piece on the board is. You know what every piece can do. So you do actually have complete information available. Now chess and checkers, because they're complicated, there's a lot of ways of arranging the pieces and a lot of factors to keep in mind, are still quite complicated games, but it's with complete information, a computer is very good at building an algorithm to optimize its play quite effectively. It's been a number of years since computers have outpaced people in terms of being better chess players. And checkers, well, a couple of years ago, checkers was completely solved. So, in some sense, when you have complete information, it's very accessible for deeper analysis or steady analysis by computers, but we don't have that in poker. If we did, well, the correct decision would be super obvious, far more obvious than in chess or checkers. If you knew what everyone had for their hole cards, what the flop, turn, and river were going to be in Hold'em, then you would very instantly know who was going to win that hand if it went to showdown. And if everyone knows who would win the hand at showdown, it makes bluffing suicidal. Bluffing an opponent who has the best hand at showdown, or who's going to have the best hand at showdown, is very much like playing chicken in a Corvette with a concrete wall. The concrete wall is going to win, and the longer you delay in aborting this chicken attempt, the more painful it's going to be for you. So you can't. It completely kills the strategy involved. Whoever has the best hand will make a bet. Whoever has whoever is going to have the best hand by the river will make a bet, and anyone else who would not have the best hand by the river will quickly fold, and that ends that hand and on to the next hand. But we don't have complete information. So you can only work on who probably has the best hand. And everyone only has so much information available. You never know what cards are going to come. And you can only make educated guesses at your opponent's hands. So you really need to be efficient with your information collection process and your decision making to optimize your gameplay. So let's actually look at the decision-making process. And well, in any given decision, there's really two main steps. You gather the information, and then you analyze the information, and you choose the best course of action. Now, the gathering information usually happens long before you're actually faced with a decision. So I'm talking about things like, what are your opponent's stats? What are your stats? Do you have any history with your opponent? Either recent history, you just beat them out of a big pot and they're on tilt maybe, or distant history. What are the betting patterns going on? What do they mean? Can you interpret them? And tells, for example, if you're playing live, oh, they twitched their eye. Interesting tells like that. Of these, the first two sound mathematical, and there's a bit of math involved, but really it's a little more talking about poker tracking software or really good memory. How often have they been folding pre-flop, and how often have they been calling or raising pre-flop to produce the statistics to base your decisions on. And the remaining three choices are definitely ones that are more about paying attention and not so much about doing some mathematical analysis. The math actually comes in the second stage. This is where you've collected all the information and now you want to choose the best course of action. And this is the stage that this video series is really going to talk about. In fact, it's only the second step that we're really going to talk about in this series. So in the first part of this stage, you want to narrow your opponent's hand, your opponent down to a hand range, or multiple opponents down to multiple hand ranges. And then once you have decided what their likely hand range is, this is the real crux of the decision. What is the best choice at that point? So this video series really is looking at the analysis of this last step. So once you have all the information collected, you've narrowed your opponent down to a hand range. Against that range, what should you do? And how can you actually determine what is the optimal play? So analyze your decision. Now the first question is, well, do we actually really need to use mathematics to analyze this information and choose the best course of action? And the answer is no, you don't. You could choose to make a best guess about what the correct decision should be. And then over time, you will have encountered that situation often enough that you'll start to become familiar with what was the right choice in the past, so what should be the right choice in this current situation. Really, you can use trial and error to actually work out what is the best choice. This is actually a valid method, this will lead to the correct answer over time. Basically, you're training yourself on what is the correct decision to make for every situation. This is great. It's you're teaching yourself the whole once burned, twice shy adage. If you make a choice and it's wrong, you learn that was wrong and you improve. It's definitely a valid way of learning. If you've heard of Pavlov's dog, there was this psychologist who was studying conditioning. So every time he was going to feed this dog, he would ring a bell. Then the dog would get fed. And of course, when the dog is about to be fed, he would salivate in anticipation of the food. And over time, when the dog would hear the bell, would start to salivate, even if no food was presented, because the dog was trained that when he heard a bell, food was going to be coming. It's the same idea here. faced in a situation, you make a choice, and then you see the outcome. Now, I did relate this to Pavlov's dog because there's an active learning process, but there's also something that's going on at the subconscious level. And the real problem with this trial and error method is that the reward does not always match up with the correct play. Some guy can shove all in pre-flop, you've got aces, you call him, awesome, it was the right choice, oh crap, he wins the hand. So you feel like you get punished for making the right choice, and you get rewarded sometimes for making the wrong choice. And because they don't line up well, it really slows down your self-training process. If you don't know ahead of time that the decision you make is correct or not, you don't know whether you should have called, but you choose to call, all you can base your answer on at that point is, well, did I win the hand or not? Was it the right choice at that time with that run out of cards? And this sounds like a deal breaker. It sounds like, well, if the reward doesn't always match with the correct play, then how can you actually train yourself in trial and error? The good news is you can, it just takes a very long time. We'll talk about probability in the next video, but what I can talk about now is that there is a law of large numbers. And if, say, you're a 60% favorite in a situation, then you win some of the time, you lose some of the time, but over the long run, you will see profit over the long run if you make that choice, the 60% favorite choice. Let's say some decision should net a return of about $1.10 for every dollar you put into that choice. Over time, every time you make that particular choice, it will eventually approximate that outcome. The problem is it takes a long time. It is the law of large numbers. It's also really relating to the central limit theorem, which is really saying that in this sort of randomness, it's going to eventually approximate some sort of normal distribution around our expected outcome. So with enough of a large sample size, you will have the right outcome over time. Now, the real problem with this is that this means you have to play a lot of hands. I'm not talking thousands of hands. I'm talking hundreds of thousands of hands or 1 million plus hands. And just to encounter this particular situation often enough that the law of large numbers does start to apply. And then on top of that, you have to be able to remember all those situations in the past. So you have to have perfect memory, and you have to have some sort of great filtering process. This is great for, poker tracking software, but if you're playing live, you don't actually have that available. And it does take a long time, so you really want to be able to cut this process short. You want to learn faster than this trial and error process would lead to. And to do that, you can take a mathematical analysis approach. Now, what's great about this is that it will tell you the correct choice. There is an optimal choice. And now the caveat here is based on the information considered. Now, I know everyone always says, oh, well, it depends and stuff. What I'm saying here is we've narrowed down our information. We've collected all the information. And on that pool of information, there is an optimal decision. You're factoring in things like the hand range of your opponents, the information you've obtained, the information you want to present to your opponents and have them obtain. There is a correct decision. What will actually net you the most money in the long run? We can do this analysis, and this is what we're actually going to talk about in this video series, but a lot of it is actually too complicated to do during a hand. So we need to find an analysis technique that's going to balance both these approaches, some sort of combined approach of analysis together with some sort of trial and error guess and check process. Really, the idea here is we perform whatever analysis we can do during a hand, and then for those decisions that would require too deep of an analysis at the heat of the moment, we'll just make a best guess. Try to look over your information, compare your hand to the hand range, and think, is it going to be best over time? What odds am I getting? Do I think I'm going to win more often than those odds are giving me? Should I call, or should I raise, or should I fold? Now, if you just stop there, really you're still only doing marginally better than trial and error. You need to actually go back at the end of your session and analyze these remaining decisions. Actually do the analysis on the ones you couldn't do in the heat of the moment. This is the most important step, especially in the early phase of poker when you're just training, because this is where you're really learning. You've made your decisions during the session. And during the session, you've been either rewarded or punished, but as we discussed in the trial and error phase, the reward might not have actually meant that it was the correct decision. And just because you lost the hand, it didn't actually mean that you made the incorrect decision based on the information you had. So this is the point where you look over your big decisions, do a full analysis, and actually decide, well, was it correct to fold in that hand, or was it correct to call there? And this is where you're training yourself on what is the right choice, and this will speed up your process of getting that mathematical mind. A lot of poker players haven't done the deep mathematical analysis, but over time, they've just played a ton of hands, and they've really their game has approached the more optimal play, and that's because they've trained themselves over time. They've done the trial and error method, and our process here is just to try to shortcut the method. Okay, so what types of analysis can we do? What sort of math do we actually need to do? And the mathematics that we're going to use in a poker decision, well, I'm going to break it down into 3 different levels of complexity. So the most basic level of complexity is some basic probability computations. And then there's an intermediate level of complexity where we're doing things like expected value computations. We're actually doing some deeper analysis. And then finally, people seem to feel that the ICM computations are the most complex. And they definitely do have the most steps involved. So that would definitely end up on the more complex end of the scale. So looking back at the basic computations, well, we're looking at things like pot odds versus outs comparisons. If you're facing a bet, what odds are you getting to call that bet? And what are your odds of winning the hand? And if your odds of winning the hand beat the odds you're getting, then you should call. If your odds of winning the hand are worse, you should fold. Now, of course, pot odds can be calculated, and a lot of people can do that in their head on the spur of the moment. In fact, it's only enough to just estimate it. You just need to compare two odds. The odds you're being laid to call the bet, and the odds that you're going to win the hand at the end based on the outs that you think you have. And of course, outs, by saying outs can be memorized, I'm not saying, that you can memorize that you have 9 outs to hit a flush sort of thing. No, I'm saying if you have 9 outs, what are the odds of you winning the hand or going into the river? Or if you have 12 outs, what are your odds of winning the hand? So basically, you can memorize based on how many outs you have, what are your odds of winning the hand, and then that way you can just compare that number to the pot odds you calculated in your head. So this is something that I would say most people can do in the heat of the moment at the poker table. Going into the intermediate complexity level, well, when you do an expected value calculation, what you're doing is you're putting an actual chip value on each decision. So you're comparing your options, fold, call, or raise, and you're reducing it down, or you're evaluating it to the point where over the long run, maybe a fold you'll lose 20 chips in a fold, and a call you'll gain 2 chips, and a raise maybe you'll lose a chip. So that will tell you that the call was the best choice. Now, of course, if you're playing in a cash game, the chips you're playing with directly relate to the actual dollar value of each decision. So these expected value computations give you an actual dollar value of what was the optimal decision, what choice you should make. And a lot of people can't do these full computations at the heat of the moment, so this might be something that gets postponed to the after-session review. And now finally, the most complex decisions, we're doing independent chip modeling. And what we're doing is in a tournament, we're taking each chip stack and we're converting it into an actual dollar value. And we can use this then to put an actual dollar value on each decision, like what we did in the expected value computation for cash games, but we need to go to this extra step because of the problem that a tournament chip does not directly translate into some dollar figure. So this is the most complicated mathematical analysis most people perform at the poker table. I should say perform after a session. And it's what this video series will be culminating in, is working out these ICM calculations. So yeah, this is a good summary of what the rest of the series will be talking about. These next 3 main levels of analysis will be the next few videos. Video 2 will actually be basic probability computations and expected value computations. And then videos 3 and 4 will both be focusing on this last independent chip modeling computations. So next video we'll talk about probability, pot odds versus outs. Do some basic calculations there, then move into decision trees and forming expected value calculations, and running through a few examples there. But thank you for watching this series or watching this first video, and I'll see you in the next video.